What do biodiesel fuel and peanut butter have in common? How are crayons and space travel connected? What are soybeans doing in our automobiles? These marvels can all be traced back to the inventive mind of a man who was born a slave, but emerged a master of scientific discovery.
He was able to just look around him and see the raw materials and then see the human need that was out there and bring the two together. And so my own personal view of Carver is that he was a master integrator.
Carver had the most remarkable heart. And that's the thing I think I love the most about his life. I mean, as tremendous of a scientist as he was, he coming out with so many useful products that even today, I don't even know what we would do without. His heart was the best.
Dr. George Washington Carver is well known throughout the world for his revolutionary research, particularly with the peanut. In the early 1900s, he discovered and developed more than 300 new uses for the legume in food products and industrial applications, from face cream to a cure for dandruff, from linoleum flooring to motor oil. Carver saw infinite possibilities in the peanut plant.
He literally inspired other researchers all across this country to take a deeper look at this plant. And of course, I believe that the end of the line has not been reached on what he uncovered.
But Carver's legacy goes far beyond his accomplishments with what was called at the time the lowly goober. He toiled for more than 40 years in his laboratory at Tuskegee Institute in Alabama and is credited with countless breakthroughs in agricultural research.
The impact of that was just astonishing. Carver, through the kind of research he did, was able to really lead the revitalization, really, of a whole region, the southern region.
He really is one of the great American heroes. If there's anyone you're going to learn about, you should learn about, Carver would be one of those people.
George Carver was born into slavery in 1864 in Diamond Grove, Missouri. He was the property of Moses Carver. Towards the end of the Civil War, Southern bushwhackers raided the Carver's farm and kidnapped baby George and his mother.
Moses Carver hired a Union scout named John Bentley to trace after them and try to recover his property. Bentley was able to find baby George, and the mother Mary was never seen again. We do not know what happened.
George was near death when he was found. Moses and his wife took care of him like he was their own child. Too frail to work in the fields, he helped out with the household chores.
It was on this farm that he had spare time to go out and wander in the woods and enjoy nature and become very close to nature. He would look at a briar, he would look at the soil, he would look at the different leaf patterns and question and wonder and ask why. Why are things like this?
George was inspired to paint after visiting a neighbor's home and seeing works of art for the first time.
So he came back, created his own brushes with twigs, and he would take nature's berries and grasses and create colors, an array of colors, and begin to paint.
Young George Carver's inventiveness and hunger for learning compelled him to seek what was impossible for many African Americans of his day: a formal education. Around the age of 11, he left the Carver farm and walked 10 miles to Neosho, Missouri, determined to attend classes at the Lincoln School for Negro Children. He worked for his room and board at the home of Mariah and Andrew Watkins, who lived next door to the school.
The story is that at lunch hour, he would jump the fence between the school and Aunt Mariah's house and go over and help her with her laundry.
Many years later, George was inspired to draw this picture of the school and the Watkins house. George studied hard and got his high school diploma. He applied to Highland College in Kansas and was accepted.
It was a big moment. Then he went to Highland, and he showed up, and they said, "We didn't know you were black," and they turned him away. It was a huge disappointment.
George didn't give up. In his mid-20s, he applied to Simpson College in Iowa, where blacks were allowed. He was accepted and began taking classes in painting.
His first love was art, and he had a teacher, his name was Etta Budd. She was very dubious about whether a black could make it in art. It was a near impossibility. And she was a little concerned about him being, he was not the first black at Simpson, but he was the only one at the time.
Carver's complex understanding of nature came through in his paintings and drawings at Simpson. Etta Budd noticed this talent and encouraged him to change his course of study to horticulture. Carver took her advice and transferred to the Iowa State College of Agriculture in Ames, where he became the first black student.
And he had some trouble with dining room privileges and other things, but he overcame them by his knowledge, which was so conspicuously immense that you didn't have to be in his presence very long to realize that this man knew things.
When Carver completed his bachelor's degree, Iowa State officials offered him a teaching position. The first black student in the college's history was now its first African-American professor. Though Carver was content at Iowa State, in April 1896, he was offered an opportunity that would change his life forever. Booker T. Washington, a leader among the newly freed slave population in the South, invited him to come to Tuskegee Institute, an all-black college in Alabama.
When Booker T. became aware of Carver, that there was an agricultural expert in the country, anywhere, who was black, that was huge. He was really the only one in the whole country. Booker T. badly wanted someone like that.
At the age of 31, George Washington Carver had found his true calling. He went to Alabama with a mission: to help a once enslaved population find its way to self-sufficiency. Little did he know what landmark discoveries lay ahead. One of George Washington Carver's closest friends at Iowa State was James Wilson, who would later become Secretary of Agriculture under President William McKinley. George Washington Carver Tech will return on Modern Marvels. We now return to George Washington Carver Tech on Modern Marvels. Today, 50,000 peanut farms thrive in the United States, most of them in the South. Virtually all of them have taken root in the past century, thanks to the horticulture professor who ventured to Tuskegee with a sense of mission in 1896. When George Washington Carver arrived by rail in Alabama, he saw no peanut fields. Instead, he was dismayed to see only one crop growing in the dry, sandy soil.
In 1794, Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin, and from that date on into 1900, cotton was king.
Carver knew that a single crop system was not good for the soil.
Anytime in agriculture you base your economy on one single crop, you're vulnerable. In a fertility standpoint, you're depleting the soil and maybe not returning all the nutrients there that is taken.
Carver also recognized that the only thing more vulnerable than the nutrient-deficient soil was the multitude of poor black sharecroppers working in the cotton fields from sunrise to sunset.
They were tied into the industrial system in the Northeast, where they had the mills, cotton mills, and it was a big system, and they were all captive in it.
Carver was anxious to get to work to solve the South's agricultural dilemma. But when he arrived at Tuskegee Institute, he discovered that he didn't even have a laboratory in which to work. And Tuskegee had no money to properly establish one.
So he went out into a local junkyard and found old pots and pans and spoons and took his students and said, we are now collecting the implements for our laboratory. He was the absolute first person to bring science to Tuskegee University.
He was one of those great visionaries that, you know, when Booker T. Washington shows him this campus and there is no agricultural college, there's nothing, you know, he had the ability to take nothing and make it into something. And I think that, you know, his life was a great example of that.
Carver started reaching out to the farmers in the area, showing them how the cotton they grew year after year was sapping the nitrogen and other nutrients from the soil. He encouraged them to plant crops that would restore these important elements back into the land. Crops like sweet potatoes, cowpeas, soybeans, and peanuts.
He was another one who came here because he cared about the man furthest down. He cared about the poor. He cared about African American people who were poor in the rural areas. And as such, he took his science to the people.
Carver designed and implemented what he called a movable school to educate the farmers about crop rotation. Many took his message to heart, but few acted on his advice.
The farmers agreed, but they did not immediately heed because they could not get loans at the bank for any crop except cotton.
Yeah, it was the cash crop at the time, and a lot of people, that was their source of income, and it would have been very difficult for those farmers, especially the poorer farmers, to change over from cotton to peanuts, and there was no market at the time for peanuts.
Carver's concern for Southern agriculture wasn't restricted to how cotton was bankrupting the soil. Another threat was lurking menacingly on the horizon. The boll weevil, the dreaded insect that had already decimated the cotton crops in Texas, was making its way across the South.
And it was moving through Mississippi, Louisiana, and headed to Alabama and Georgia at the rate of about 100 miles per year. And he warned them.
There was no stopping this devastating force of nature. The weevil actually lays its eggs inside the unripe cotton boll, and the newborns eat their way out, destroying the crop in the process. Carver believed the South's best defense against the boll weevil was the peanut, but he had to convince Southern farmers that peanuts could become the cash crop that King Cotton had been for so long.
George Washington Carver really became an evangelist for peanut growing in the southeast part of the United States.
In 1902, Carver entered his lab at Tuskegee to begin intense research into the peanut. He explored its properties and looked for ways to put the protein and vitamin-rich crop to use. Peanuts are made up of oils, resins, fats, sugars, and starches. And Carver came up with more than 300 new uses for them, in recipes and in a variety of synthetic applications.
He made paper and ink and shoe polish and floor wax and axle grease. And he did have some kind of a peanut plastic that he'd made.
And all of these uses, 300 of them, all the way from various soups to soap and shaving cream. He built the foundation block upon which peanuts were ushered in.
As Carver predicted, in 1915, the boll weevil hit the southeastern farms and completely destroyed the cotton fields. None of the farmers from Georgia or Alabama could pay off the loans on their land. But thanks to Carver's zealous advocacy, peanuts were poised to become a viable commercial alternative to cotton.
By 1917, cotton was dethroned and peanuts was lifted up, and the acreage increased in the southeast 400% in just 2 years.
As peanut power spread across the South, Carver continued to experiment with a now lucrative crop. While analyzing the properties of peanut oil, he discovered that it was very easily absorbed when rubbed onto the skin. Carver promoted peanut oil as an effective lubricant to be used in vigorous massage treatments for those suffering from muscular disorders. Thousands of patients, including those crippled by polio, came to Tuskegee to receive peanut oil massages. Even more wrote to Carver to purchase the oil. While it was never considered a cure for any disease, those who underwent the treatment reported encouraging results. Word of Carver's promising work made it all the way to the White House.
One of the extractions that he did with the peanut, one of our presidents, Roosevelt, used it for his infantile paralysis.
In 1942, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt paid an official visit to Tuskegee. He greeted Carver in person and applauded the research being done on the Alabama campus.
I'm proud to come to Tuskegee because I'm proud of what Tuskegee has done.
While Carver has been called the father of the peanut industry, there is one product that many mistakenly attribute to him: peanut butter.
Peanut butter as we know it in America was basically invented in 1890 by a physician in Missouri. And he was looking for high-protein, nutritious foods to feed his patients who had trouble eating meat because they had poor dental health. The first real introduction to the masses for peanut butter happened in 1904 at the Universal Exposition in St. Louis, and that's when really peanut butter was introduced to the American public.
And then this complemented and augmented George Washington Carver's research at that time. The two are not unconnected because he had laid the foundation, even though he didn't invent peanut butter. He had laid the foundation for raising up and digging deep into the kernel and chemically telling the world what a wonderful food product peanut was.
His love of peanuts helped to really promote its usage widespread, and I think that, he would be very happy to see how his legacy has really taken shape in modern-day America.
We basically take a peanut that George Washington Carver helped develop and build in the field and help it grow to what it is today, to the point that we now buy the peanut, we shell the peanut, and then we offer a service to customers who then further process it.
Carver would no doubt be pleased with the assembly line efficiency of modern peanut processing plants, like Golden Peanut in Dawson, Georgia.
We shell about 25 tons an hour of peanuts. It takes about a truckload an hour to supply this plant.
The peanuts that make the grade are bagged and sent to manufacturers. Those that don't measure up undergo a process that's come a long way since Carver's day.
Broken kernels, damaged kernels, small sizes are then sent to the crushing plant. There we process them for peanut oil and the balance being peanut meal.
When Carver produced peanut oil in his lab more than a century ago, he boiled 25 pounds at a time and then extracted the oil by straining the mixture through cheesecloth. Today, the refineries steam heat the nuts and then put them through a mechanical press to extract most of the oil. At Golden Peanut, they press 350 tons of peanuts each day. George Washington Carver's work with the peanut in the early 1900s became the foundation for a new science known as chemergy, the process of discovering industrial uses for agricultural products. Using peanuts, sweet potatoes, soybeans, and other crops, he literally planted the seed for technological innovations that would change the course of farming in the United States. In 1921, Carver was invited to testify at a congressional hearing for a proposed tariff on peanuts. He was allotted 10 minutes, but congressmen were so impressed by Carver's testimony that he was allowed to speak for over an hour and a half. George Washington Carver Tech will return on Modern Marvels. We now return to George Washington Carver Tech on Modern Marvels. George Washington Carver's enduring influence is evident in a diverse array of products that modern consumers use every day. Carpet backing, crayons, oil solvents, and even a new vodka are some of the items that can be traced to his experiments with another soil-enriching and protein-rich crop, the soybean.
We work in plastics, adhesives, in lubricants, so it's really a whole realm of new products from that technology.
Carver learned that the oil from soybeans is composed of 5 fatty acids, and that the bean itself is naturally rich in vitamin E.
You have a bean that has a lot of oil in it and a lot of protein, and it can be crushed and separated, and things can happen to that little bean.
When Carver looked at the soybean under the microscope, he saw that the oil had chemical properties that would allow it to easily bond with other substances.
The soybean oil itself is really long-chained. Just a lot of carbons in a row, 13, 16 carbons. And so that gives it ability to be a very flexible type of oil to be used, and it's also relatively inexpensive as an oil.
Carver's early experiments resulted in food products. Soy mayonnaise was one of his first successes.
He said he started work with the soybean around 1903, and by the time they'd finished that phase of the work, they had about 30 products.
When I go in a supermarket and go along the shelf of health foods, and you see bacon and lunch meat and the mock chicken and all those products that are made out of soy and other vegetable-based products, you just have to think of Carver. I mean, that was a major focus for him.
In his humble lab at Tuskegee, George Washington Carver experimented with a handful of beans, a coffee grinder, and some beakers, and came up with more than 100 new uses for soybeans and soybean oil, including a type of soy plastic. In the 1930s, automotive pioneer Henry Ford became aware of Carver's pioneering research with soybeans. In 1937, he invited him to participate in a scientific conference in Dearborn, Michigan. Ford shared Carver's passion for developing new uses for farm products, and he was a major player in the Chemergy movement.
And he was really taken by the fact that Carver could take soybean, for example, and come up with components of car parts.
You look at a guy like Henry Ford, who had tremendous resources, and he was always looking for the newest and the brightest and looking for other opportunities. And he saw this man Carver, and he saw him as just a gold mine, a wealth of information and a wealth of creativity, and really wanted to bring him into his organization. And Carver was not drawn by the money, not drawn by the opportunity. He knew that his job was to be there at Tuskegee, to teach, to guide.
Despite his devotion to Tuskegee, Carver continued to personally consult with Ford about his ongoing research in soy plastics. In 1942, the automaker unveiled a car that included a bushel of soy in its construction.
The gear shift knob, the door crank handles, the foot pedals, things like that. Mr. Ford had nearly 7,000 acres of soybeans grown right there in that area. He had the research labs right there that he worked in, and he tied that with industry in his plant of building automobiles.
In a rare film from 1943, the Ford Motor Company revealed a car that had some body parts constructed from soy plastic. Ford researchers wanted to demonstrate just how strong and ding-proof this material could be. And Henry Ford himself even took a few whacks.
Henry Ford took a mallet and hit the trunk lid of a Ford car to show the durability of soy plastic. We can do that today with soy plastic made from soybeans.
Carver and Ford's creative partnership is echoed in what the Ford Motor Company calls the U-Car. Built in 2003, this concept car's interior is made entirely from an eco-friendly recyclable polyester with soy-based seats and tailgate. while the Ford Motor Company carries on Carver's belief in the soybean's potential. So do scientists at Iowa State University, Carver's alma mater. But while Carver worked primarily with the oil from the soybean, they focused on soy flour. They've used the flour to develop a breakthrough formula for producing a new variety of durable plastic. Soybean farmers around the country are well aware of Carver's early research and the potential of using soybeans in commercial products.
George Washington Carver discovered years ago that there was this multitude of products that could come out of our natural bio products. Soy has been called the miracle bean because it is so usable in so many different ways, and Carver recognized that, and the soybean farmers of the United States have carried it that one step further.
The newspaper industry embraced the soybean in 1987, when soy ink was first used in the printing process. Today, more than 3,000 papers across the country use color inks made from soybeans. From the St. Louis Post-Dispatch to the LA Times, publishers are finding that the soy-based products are just as practical as their petroleum-based counterparts. Construction engineers are discovering the soybean's value as well. A recent example of their work is the new roof atop the Shed Aquarium in Chicago.
It's non-toxic, it's 100% waterproof. The application of it is very simple, very easy to do, and it will save us energy by reducing our heating and cooling costs in the building.
In the 1940s, the soybean's greatest champion had gained world renown as a scientific pioneer. But George Washington Carver remained a simple man. Although he was the head of the Agricultural College at Tuskegee, when he went out to the farms to teach, people often mistook him for a hired hand. But his trademark rumpled suit was never without some sort of fresh flower or weed in the lapel, a symbol of his love for nature.
Carver was a curious character. He cared nothing for his outer appearance. When he was going on speaking tours, if somebody said he ought to dress better, he would say, well, if they want a suit of clothes, I'll send them the clothes. If they want the information, I'll go.
Carver never married and professed to be completely fulfilled by his work.
Another thing he said about a wife was, what woman would want a husband forever dropping soil specimens all over her parlor? And how could I explain that I had to go out every morning at 4 a.m. to talk to flowers?
For nearly half a century, Carver lived alone in his room at Tuskegee. In his free time, he enjoyed crocheting, one of the handicrafts he learned back in Diamond Grove, Missouri when he was a child. Continuing another legacy from his childhood, Carver devised a way to make various pigments and paint from the soil he found in the Alabama countryside. He combined the clay soil with equal amounts of sulfuric and hydrochloric acids and bits of scrap iron. Carver then boiled the mixture until the iron dissolved. The result was a dry paste that could be combined with oil to make paint.
At that time, it was absolutely phenomenal. And to see the pure royal blues that he could extract from Alabama clay just is mind-boggling.
To achieve his brilliant blue color, Carver added a compound of potassium ferrocyanide and nitric acid.
See, the genius of Carver was that he wouldn't just do that and then write a paper and then get an award for doing that. He would then go out to people's farms and take these buckets of paint and stay overnight with the family, helping to paint and beautify their homes.
He was a chemist, a botanist, a biologist, an agronomist, and this consummate researcher. George Washington Carver was a man way before his time. Can you imagine what he could have done with a computer?
Carver was a fearless trailblazer, a driving force in discovering ways to use natural resources to benefit mankind. Another area of research he pioneered is just now starting to give the oil industry a run for its money. Inventor Thomas Edison once offered Carver a six-figure annual salary to work for him. Carver declined and stayed at Tuskegee Institute, where he earned $1,500 per year. George Washington Carver Tech will return on Modern Marvels. We now return to George Washington Carver Tech on Modern Marvels. Today, American farmers are harvesting approximately 3 billion bushels of soybeans per year. 80% of the crop George Washington Carver championed is used for protein and food products for both human and animal consumption. The other 20% is used to produce soy oil, which, as Carver demonstrated, can be used for a variety of purposes. One of the fastest growing applications for the oil is in biodiesel technology.
Biodiesel is a diesel fuel replacement that's made from any vegetable oil or animal fat. And the way that it's made is you take a vegetable oil and you react it with an alcohol like ethanol or methanol, and that reaction causes the glycerin to separate from the oil, and the resulting chemical compound is biodiesel, and it acts very chemically similar to diesel fuel in a diesel engine, except that it is 10 times less toxic than table salt and biodegrades as fast as sugar.
The roots of biodiesel fuel go back to the 1930s, when Carver and Henry Ford recognized the need to find alternative fuels. With the economy facing a depression, they tried to turn the tide by applying more agricultural products to growing industrial markets, like plastics and rubber.
Mr. Carver and Mr. Ford saw that the depletion of fossil fuels was inevitable. They looked for the use of plants like soybeans to be that fuel of the future.
Carver and Ford believed that vegetable oils could be used to fuel internal combustion engines, and they were not alone in that conviction.
Dr. Rudolf Diesel was a German scientist who invented the first diesel engine. It's a compression ignition technology that's much more fuel efficient, and he ran that first engine on peanut oil. And he was a scientist along with George Washington Carver and Henry Ford, all scientists who had a vision for sustainability and renewable energy through agriculture.
The high cost of agricultural energy sources compared to petroleum-based fuel held the technology back. Fossil fuels were abundant and cheap, but today that gap is closing.
In the last 3 years, for example, the price of biodiesel has come down dramatically, while the price of diesel fuel has almost doubled.
In just 5 years, the biodiesel industry has gone from research and development to the open road. It has been tested over 50 million miles in every type of diesel engine.
Now there are more than 500 commercial fleets using various blends of biodiesel, including all 4 major branches of the military, federal government fleets, municipal fleets.
George Washington Carver was not only a pioneer in the biodiesel field, he also took some of the first steps into the area of genetic engineering. Carver created hybrids with the flowers and plants in his laboratory by painstakingly crossing 2 specimens and waiting patiently for the results.
And it can take years of crossing and back crossing and selecting for the better quality.
Today, a new generation of research scientists is assembled at Tuskegee University to conduct experiments in all facets of biotechnology. One objective of the research is to find ways to transplant genes from one organism into another.
We can't kind of carrying on the legacy of Carver's in terms of crop improvements of nutritional quality or biological resistant quality for better human health and nutrition.
Tuskegee scientists are currently working on a gene that will increase the amount of amino acid in sweet potatoes. More amino acid translates to a higher protein level in the crop.
So we have improved the quality of sweet potato by 5-fold, making sweet potato as good as soybean protein. So that's a big legacy of Carver that we're carrying also.
Carver's extensive experiments with the sweet potato focused on its nutritional properties. He knew that planting sweet potatoes would replenish the soil with important nutrients. He urged farmers to make it a part of their crop rotation plan and taught his students how to plant the potato and care for it on campus. This way they'd be able to teach others how to cultivate this iron and protein-rich food. In his laboratory experiments, he succeeded in creating more than 100 products from the sweet potato, including fabric dyes and flour. During World War I, wheat shortages in the United States raised demand for Carver's sweet potato flour. It was used to make bread to feed American soldiers and their allies. Carver's innovative work with the sweet potato was among his many success stories that inspire today's Tuskegee researchers. Here, the march of science is measured by his example.
I think he'll be happy. We work in his building there, and I think sometimes we think like we see him walking around and say, yes, go on, you're doing a good job.
George Washington Carver's vision knew no bounds, and the long shadow of his legacy is about to go stratospheric. In 1925, Carver was granted a patent for making face cream, primarily from peanuts. George Washington Carver Tech will return on Modern Marvels, here on the History Channel.
Everyone deserves to live a little, don't they?
Vegas Vixen on Breaking Vegas tonight.
We now return to George Washington Carver Tech on Modern Marvels. The innovative work of George Washington Carver has had a far-reaching impact on our world today. And now his influence can even be felt in outer space. For the past 18 years, NASA engineers have been working with Tuskegee University scientists to find efficient ways to grow food in space.
There will be lunar bases, Mars bases, sometime way out in the future. And even for long-term space flights, people have to eat.
For humans and long-term space missions, it's costing approximately about $10,000 per pound to lift a pound of payload. And if you're going to space, it is be very expensive to take soil with you since you want to grow plants.
Today, when the space station food supply is low, a new shipment is sent via an unmanned spacecraft. If the craft misses its mark, serious problems can occur. The hungry crew could be forced to return to Earth. Or worse, a multi-million-dollar mission would have to be aborted. So plans are underway to grow enough food for the space station to be self-sufficient. The Tuskegee scientists began their work with two of George Washington Carver's favorite plants: the peanut and the sweet potato.
Our job was to take Carver's two commodities he was most famous for and figure out how to grow them, first of all, with no soil. That was our first job. Now, isn't that a setup for Carver? I mean, wouldn't that be right down his alley?
The Department of Agricultural Sciences at Tuskegee pursued a unique hydroponics-based growing system called nutrient film technique. It requires no soil and relies only on water and a mixture of growing agents.
And the nutrient solution flows continuously over the roots as the plants grow.
The tiny roots form a fibrous carpet or soil-less bed for the plants. After 2 or 3 weeks, the potato starts to change color and bulk up. As part of the NASA program, the university also built growth chambers to produce basil and carrots in the same way.
We can control how much light they get, what time they get it, the temperature. And not only just one temperature, we can actually ramp the temperature up just like nature does it.
The Tuskegee scientists tested their growing system for several years. When they were sure that it would work in a space environment, they shared their findings with NASA.
And when the NASA folks came from Kennedy Space Center to see it, they could not believe it, but there it was. So that's why I'm saying it took some really, I would say, Carverites or brilliant young faculty and students who just stayed at it.
Today, a new crop of carvers in training is sprouting up in San Antonio, Texas.
And if it would have had real shallow roots way up here and that's it, do you think it'd be able to tap way down and get some water?
The Carver Academy is dedicated to keeping the spirit of George Washington Carver fresh in the minds of today's youth. The school was founded by former NBA superstar David Robinson.
It started more because I grew up kind of with a teacher's heart and always wanted to teach, always loved teaching, and since I became a basketball player, teaching was pretty much out of the question, but I've always loved inspiring and stirring the heart.
The school emphasizes the same hands-on learning techniques that Carver practiced in his career. And the teachers also try to instill in the children a curiosity about the world around them.
They made like heads and like those lights that they use.
You know, nature speaks to us every hour if you would just listen. We're so tech-oriented. We know everybody wants to play with the latest gadgets and see what, you know, science is coming up with. Well, the most incredible things we have are right there in nature. They're right in front of our faces. They're the plants that grow right in front of us. And the kids have access to the most remarkable resources every single day.
It's overflowing.
The Carver Academy is perhaps the best tribute to the scientist who was constantly honored during his lifetime. He accepted every award with his signature humility.
I am not sure that I am worthy of this splendid citation, but I wish to say also that I thank you from the depths of my heart.
He just refused to give himself credit for any of this. He gives the credit to God.
On January 5th, 1943, at the age of 78, Carver died of natural causes in his room at Tuskegee Institute. 6 months later, President Franklin Roosevelt established the George Washington Carver National Monument in Diamond, Missouri. It includes the 210-acre farm Carver explored as an orphaned slave child.
Yes, he was born into slavery, and yes, he had great obstacles to overcome. But every obstacle that he overcame led him one step closer to becoming the great man that he was.
He just made those steps. He just kept walking, and he walked right into history and right into our lives every day.
George Washington Carver's work has been impacting and enhancing our culture for more than a century. For the next generation, determined to further his legacy, the challenge is daunting.
We are standing on the shoulders of giants, and Carver is one of those giants before us, you know, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. What we do is we stand on that foundation that's already been laid, and that's a great foundation. Carver's built some blocks for us, but you know, we have to continue and take that tradition further.